The Republican Party looking to more changes to the tax code as it gears up for the 2018 midterms. A proposal for an internet sales tax is gaining supporters in both chambers. Meanwhile, the party also looking at a second round of tax cuts. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise talking up the proposal yesterday on the Daily Briefing.
The Democrats, by the way, just recently said if they get the majority back and Nancy Pelosi Speaker, they'll reverse that success we're having, and they would raise taxes on families and on businesses. So what we want to do is make the tax cuts permanent. We thought the idea of cutting taxes for families would be bipartisan, but Nancy Pelosi decided that they wanted to block that benefit to American families.
Bill McGurn is a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and you all wrote today about this possible internet sales tax hike. This is an issue that's sort of been creeping around for quite a while. Is it gaining steam?
Well, it's gaining steam in some sense. There's parts of it that the Supreme Court's looking at. I think Democrats want to raise taxes. I mean, we're obviously skeptical. I mean, we're always skeptical about raising taxes and people saying you have to do this or brick and mortar places will be hurt. But, you know, today there's not that big line between brick and mortar and online. A lot of these places have both, you know.
In fact, today in what you all wrote on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal is that the real reason some Republicans in Congress are now rushing to pass their kill bill, is that they want to get credit for axing the court's 1992 decision with retailers at home, but stuffing such an important policy change inside a huge spending bill with little debate would be a political scam. Raising taxes on small business and consumers won't be a good look for Republicans in November, nor an inducement for investment and growth. And I wanted to ask, just from a policy standpoint, they have the tax reform that they pass in December, and they're riding high on that.
Right.
Maybe they feel like that won't last them all the way through the midterm, so they want to do something more.
Right.
I could see making the tax cuts permanent, as Mr. Scalise said yesterday, but adding an internet tax to me seems like probably counterproductive.
And especially to attach it, as we say, to an omnibus bill. I mean, you really need a lot of debate because it's a complex thing. And the way they're looking at it, the dominant way that they're looking at it, would really make it hard for a small retailer. You know, Amazon could deal with it and so forth, and the bigger ones. But the way they're doing it could really come down very hard on small businesses.
Yeah, I can understand why some of the states want to do this, but I think
states always want revenue, right? Maybe they should look at their spending. And, you know, we point out, too, that some of the states with healthy economies, like Florida, South Dakota, have seen their sales tax revenue go up. So it's, you know, it's a little more complicated than the scaremongers would have it.
And that would hurt everybody, actually, consumers.
And they, as you said, we have to get back on the growth message, you know, delivering opportunity, jobs, and fatter paychecks.
Well, that's actually been a very interesting thing. I mean, I was saying that I don't really care if there are a lot of changes of personnel within the White House or in the administration, but just from, you know, we used to work at a White House. If you are talking about personnel issues, the media will cover that story first every single time. And you have to give them a reason to cover the growth message and not give them an excuse not to.
Well, and especially after what we've seen in Pennsylvania 18, where the Republican lost in a district that President Trump carried by 18 points. Now, Mitt Romney carried it by a similar margin, so it's not like one that Donald Trump reversed, but they're having trouble out there. And it seems to me we were cruising along in a nice growth message, and look at these bonuses and look at the new opportunities. Then tariffs hit, and now we're talking about taxes.
And it's really interesting because you asked Republicans about, so was that message not working? And they won't really say, but you know what the Democrats say really did work for them in Pennsylvania 18 and other places? It's still health care.
Right.
And Republicans are not talking about that at all.
No. Well, it looks like the Republicans, don't you think there was, 625 votes or something that separated? Don't you think if Mr. Saccone had talked about the growth and what's happening in his district, the investment, the people that got bonuses, don't you think he might have found
I can't remember
700 votes or so?
I can't remember which columnist it was that said it, so I'll just repeat it as if it was mine. That the Democrat, Connor Lamb, talked about redevelopment of his district and economic growth, and the Republicans were talking about Nancy Pelosi. And that's probably not going to cut it.
Look, and let's face it, he had the help of a fawning national media. If you Googled Connor Lamb, it was all the Atlantic, New Yorker, New York, all these
But do you really think that those voters there cared about that?
No, but I think what it did is it did create a false moderation on some of these issues.
And possibly some fundraising.
All
right. Bill McGurn, thank you so much. Have a good weekend. A live look inside the White House, where the briefing is about to begin. We'll take you there as soon as it starts. Plus, more finger pointing after a former Russian spy is poisoned in England. Did the order for the attack on a man and his daughter come all the way from the top? Here's Sarah Sanders at the White House.
We'll come up now to make a statement and take a few questions. Then I'll be back up after he's done to take your questions on other news of the day. Thanks. Mark?
Thanks, Sarah. Hey, good afternoon. Since I know many of you are interested in White House personnel issues, we wanted to take a few minutes to discuss the historic obstruction that we have faced by Senator Schumer and Senate Democrats in confirming our nominees to enable us to fill out our White House. The Senate obviously has the constitutional responsibility for advice and consent. So what that looks like in real life is the president selects a nominee. They then undergo an entire FBI background check. They work with the Office of Government Ethics to deconflict financial issues. And that's a process that takes a good amount of time, a good amount of resources. Only then, after cleared through an FBI background check and the Office of Government Ethics, is a nominee submitted to the United States Senate. When they get to the Senate, they go through several additional evaluations, including meetings with staff, meetings with the members on both sides of the aisle. The nominee then undergoes a hearing, and the committee then votes on the nominee to get out of that committee. At that point, the nominee moves to the Senate floor for full confirmation. Traditionally, the Senate routinely confirms an administration's nominees once out of committee. It is there to respect the will of the American people and the election for an administration to fill out its roles under a new president. Instead, what Senator Schumer has done is to require cloture votes to essentially slow down the process and to obstruct. At this point, in the past 4 administrations combined, the last 4 administrations, the Senate had conducted 17 cloture votes combined. Cloture vote, in essence, being a filibuster on a nominee. 17 cloture votes in the last 4 administrations combined at this point. Today, the Senate has had 79 cloture votes in the first 14 months of our administration. 17 over the last 4 administrations versus 79 in the first 14 months of our administration. That is roughly 5 times the number of the last 4 administrations combined. Senator Schumer is essentially weaponizing a Senate procedure and demanding cloture votes on our nominees that he even eventually supports. 11 of the president's nominees have been approved without a single dissenting vote, yet still forced to go through 30 hours of debate to essentially slow down the Senate calendar simply for the purpose of obstruction. Even Senate Democrats have begun to call this out and to say it is getting to the point of ridiculous. At this rate, the United States Senate would take 11 and a half years to confirm our nominees. 11 and a half years to confirm our nominees. So let me give you one more example of the comparison historically. In the first entire term of the George H.W. Bush administration, his entire 4 years, he faced 1 cloture vote. In the entire 4 years of the Clinton administration, he faced 10 cloture votes. Under the George W. Bush administration, the entire first term, he faced 4 cloture votes. Barack Obama faced 17 in his first entire 4 years. We have faced 79 in our first 14 months. That adds up to 32 combined in the entire first 4 years of those administrations, relative to 79 in our first less than a year and a half. So let me give a couple more illustrations of specific individuals. Pat Pizzella is our nominee to be the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor. We still do not have a Deputy Secretary, a number 2 person at the Department of Labor. Pat Pizzella was nominated 269 days ago. He was reported out of committee in October. He was confirmed in the George W. Bush administration by a unanimous voice vote. So he's already been confirmed by a previous Congress without any dissension. And yet, 269 days later, we still do not have a deputy secretary at the Department of Labor. At the EPA, Deputy Administrator Andrew Wheeler, he was nominated 152 days ago. Scott Pruitt still to this day does not have a deputy, a number 2 serving at the EPA. He was reported out of committee in November. Yalim Poblete will be Assistant Secretary for Arms Control at the Department of State when confirmed. Obviously, arms control is an important issue for national security and particularly heightened in light of upcoming negotiations with North Korea. She was nominated 298 days ago and has been previously a staff director of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Isabel Patalunas, nominated 270 days ago, reported out of committee in July, has been nominated to be Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Intelligence and Analysis. This helps work with many of the sanctions that you have covered. So many of these positions, in fact, are national security positions. And lastly, Kevin McAleenan, to be Commissioner of the Customs and Border Patrol, was nominated 298 days ago. Obviously, it's been a priority of this administration to highlight the security threats we face at our southern border. Kevin, in taking that role, will be safeguarding our borders and helping to prevent terrorists and contraband from entering the United States. Yet Congress and the Senate continues to dither and not have a confirmation vote. We're pleased that he finally got through a cloture vote last week. We expect him to be confirmed on Monday night. But 298 days later, as the American people have been anxious to make sure that our borders being secured, we still not have a head of Customs and Border Patrol. So this level of obstruction is beyond historic. It is something that, as you, I know, are very focused on personnel inside the White House. We ask that you also shed light on the historic obstruction that's happened in the United States Senate to make sure that we are able to fill out our administration to do the job of the American people and to help make sure that our country is safe and secure.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for coming out.
All right, that's Mark Short. He's the legislative director for the White House. And as soon as Sarah Sanders begins to take questions, as she said she'll do as soon as he's finished, we'll get back to him. Meanwhile, a lot of Democrats are treating Nancy Pelosi like poison ivy, keeping their distance from the House Minority Leader, especially after Conor Lamb's strong showing Tuesday in Pennsylvania, where Lamb disavowed her during his campaign. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. Mike.
Well, Dana, good afternoon. Some Democrats are suggesting that Conor Lamb race was a rejection of the Washington, D.C. Democratic Party establishment.
All you really need to know on how to win elections. Talk about economics, keep all these smart people in Washington, let them stay in their cocktail parties and talk to each other about how smart they are, and let these local candidates run their races.
Republicans have been eager to tie Democrat candidates like Conor Lamb to House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. For one, they hope that will motivate GOP voters by warning Pelosi could be Speaker again. But a California Democrat says that didn't work in Pennsylvania.
Republicans tried to hammer Conor over the airwaves that he'd be, tied to Nancy Pelosi. Then they pulled down those ads because I think they saw that it wasn't resonating with voters because, voters don't go to the polls in these local races thinking about what it means, in national politics.
But Conor Lamb did distance himself from Pelosi to be more competitive in that Pennsylvania district, and it has led to questions about whether Democrats will need to run away from their San Francisco liberal leader.
I don't think that he ran against me the entire time. I think he ran on his positive agenda. I just wanted him to win. I don't think that that really had that much impact on the race. He won. If we hadn't won, you might have a question, but we won. We won the race.
Many are likely to ask if Pelosi can return to power if candidates had to run away from her or keep her at a distance in order to win their races. Dana?
Mike Emanuel, thank you. So as soon as Sarah Sanders takes the podium, we'll take you right back to the White House.
This is Laura.
Race, the founder of Storyline and the host of Politics Inside out on Sirius. XM POTUS and Jamie Weinstein, host of the National Review podcast, The Jamie Weinstein Show. Both really good shows, and you're on my show. Thank you for being here today. I don't know if you had a chance to see, but we just had a soundbite that Mike Emanuel played from Nancy Pelosi. She's pretty comfortable with people running against her in order to win elections. And Tim Ryan, who's a congressman from Ohio, said, at the end of the day, I hope that whoever our nominees are, we let them be who they are and run the kind of races they think is best for their district. Jamie, Politico wrote a story this morning that this Connor Lamb win is basically exposing some rifts within the Democratic Party. Your thoughts on that?
Well, this has been a problem for some time. It's only really coming to the fore more recently. But I remember in 2002, after the Democrats didn't do as well as they wanted, Harold Ford Jr. trying to challenge Nancy Pelosi for the speakership, saying that she was too liberal. But this had some good effect in 2006 when Rahm Emanuel was leading the DCCC. He had congressional candidates, supported congressional candidates who are more conservative Democrats, and they were able to take the House. So that type of strategy where, you support Democrats, even more conservative or moderate Democrats in districts where that's necessary, ultimately does well for the Democratic Party.
Chris, Connor Lamb did not have a primary, and a lot of these other Democrats do, sometimes up to 10 candidates in the primary race. And so what tends to happen is you get pulled further and further to your left. And what Jamie was just talking about is Rahm Emanuel and Chuck Schumer's play that year was to just run straight up the middle. Can they actually do that this year?
Yeah, that's a great question about whether they can do it, but clearly Nancy Pelosi and the congressional leadership are okay with letting them try, and that's been different ever since kind of the blue dogs and the New Dems got wiped out after Obamacare. Democrats understand that they need those conservative Democrats to make the majority. Nancy Pelosi doesn't become speaker again at all if she's in the minority, and if she has a number of members who ran against her and opposed her, but won that seat because they were seen as being independent, not kowtowing to Democratic leadership in Washington, then she has a chance of becoming speaker again. I don't think the numbers are going to be so huge that there are so many insurgent candidates that her speakership would be in danger if they were able to recapture the House. The first order of business for Democrats, Dana, is that they get the majority. The second is, does Nancy Pelosi win? I think they understand that, and I think they're pushing for those centrist Democrats. We'll see if they can win those primaries.
Well, and then I guess the Republicans will see if they actually vote as centrist Democrats, because, Jamie, we know that they might run that way, but then when people get into office, they tend to vote with their party.
Absolutely. But, one name that I'm surprised we're not hearing more of is Mudcat Saunders. He's kind of a famous Democratic political strategist. He's the guy of this era. Nancy Pelosi should be meeting with him, getting him to help some of these Democrats in more conservative areas. He helped Jim Webb get elected in Virginia, John Edwards in North Carolina, Mark Warner in Virginia. He's kind of this populist Democrat that would be perfect of this era. I'm really surprised you're not hearing more of Mudcat Saunders. Right. And by the way, quote a minute. He's the best quote machine in politics.
I know. I've read a profile on him before. I got to check back in with him. Something happened right before this show, and that is that President Trump weighed in on the races down in Nevada. Let me read you his tweet. He said, "It would be great for the Republican Party of Nevada and its unity if good guy Danny Tarkanian would run for Congress and Dean Heller, who is doing a really good job, could run for Senate unopposed." Chris, if you could just hold that thought. I think that we have Sarah Sanders coming back to the briefing. And we're going to go to her. And I'll bring the panel back right after Sarah Sanders. Here she is.
A few questions and then let everybody get out of here. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, Sarah, an attorney for the porn star known as Stormy Daniels said this morning in a television interview that she was physically threatened to stay silent about her affair with President Trump. I'm wondering if you've talked to the president about that, if he knows who might have threatened her, and more generally, if he has any concerns about women accusers being threatened in that way.
Obviously, we take the safety and security of any person seriously. Certainly would condemn anyone threatening any individual, but I have no knowledge of that situation and would refer you to the president's outside personal attorneys.
Did the president have anything to say about it?
I haven't spoken with him about that specifically.
Sarah, we're hearing a lot from staff behind the scenes saying they're on edge, people are worried, they don't know what's happening in terms of staffing, exits, firings. Has the president or the chief of staff made any kind of assurances to staffers today about what's to come?
The chief of staff actually spoke to a number of staff this morning, reassuring them that there were personnel changes, no immediate personnel changes at this time, and that people shouldn't be concerned. We should do exactly what we do every day, and that's come to work and do the very best job that we can. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're focused on. And many of us have relayed that to other staffers that weren't part of that meeting. And we're going to continue to focus on having record success in this second year as we had in our first year, and we fully expect to do that, and we expect that to do that as a staff and as a team. Kevin?
Thank you, Sarah. Life sentences for drug dealers as part of the effort to fight opioid abuse and distribution. I'm just curious about the president's plan with respect to that and his thoughts on that. I know that you don't want to get ahead of what he may be about to announce, but broadly speaking, is the ultimate penalty something that should be on the table when it comes to dealing with drug dealers and opioid abuse?
I'm not going to get ahead, as you said, of any potential policy rollouts that we may or may not have here at the White House. I can tell you the president is headed to New Hampshire on Monday to reinforce the administration's commitment to combating the opioid crisis. This builds on some of the previous action that the administration has taken, and we're going to continue to look for ways that we can combat that crisis. But in terms of specifics on a rollout, I don't have that. What I can tell you are some of the things that we have done, particularly with the president's budget, where it included $10 billion for HHS to combat the opioid epidemic by preventing opioid abuse and helping those who are addicted get access to overdose, reversal drugs, treatment, and recovery support services. Also empowered Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and he has announced the establishment of a team to help federal enforcement disrupt online illicit opioid sales. The Department of Veterans Affairs became the first hospital system to release opioid prescribing rates. And President Trump also signed the Interdict Act, which authorizes the appropriation of $9 million to U.S. Customs and Border Protection to prevent, detect, and interdict the unlawful importation of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. Those are some things and steps that the administration has taken in terms of additional things and policies that we may roll out. I'm not going to get ahead of any potential announcements that may or may not happen next week. Teresa?
Thank you. Sarah, you took to Twitter last night to ensure the public that McMaster's job was safe, but has the president spoken directly to either McMaster, Carson, Shulkin to tell them that their jobs are in fact safe?
Again, like I said last night, and I'll echo it again, I spoke directly to the president last night. He asked me to pass that message along to General McMaster. I know the two of them have been in meetings today. Whether or not that came up, I don't know. But again, our focus is not on a lot of the news stories that you guys would like us to be focused on, but we're actually focused on what the American people want us to do, and that's to come here and do our jobs. General McMaster is a dedicated public servant, and he is here not focused on the news stories that many of you are writing, but on some really big issues, things like North Korea, things like Russia, things like Iran. That's what he's doing, and that's what we're going to continue to be focused on every single day that we show up for work.
Pointed out, there is an issue when you look at the number of people that you're hoping to confirm. So to look at the people in these top positions that continue to change, just wanting to know if the president gave assurances to Carson, to Shulkin, as well as McMaster, that their jobs are in fact safe.
Look, we aren't making any, as I just said, we don't have any personnel changes at this time, but the president shouldn't be bound because Democrats in the Senate can't do their job. If the president wants to be able to make a change because he feels like it's the right thing for the American people, his hands shouldn't be tied because Democrats failed to do what they were elected to do. This president was elected to put forward policies and push those policies forward with the team that he selects, not the team that the Democrats think he should have. That's not how the system works. And just because they don't want the president to have his full team, that doesn't mean if he decided to make changes, he shouldn't be able to. Peter.
Sarah, just for clarity on this, though, I know you said that this is something that the media wants to talk about right now, but frankly, it's the president who's repeatedly sort of stoked the speculation. Just yesterday, he said, I think you want to see change. Earlier this week, he said, I'm really at a point where we're getting very close to having the cabinet and other things that I want. So isn't it the president himself who's sort of creating this aura of, some use the word chaos, but simply put, turmoil or a potential upheaval within the West Wing and frankly across the administration?
Taking two sentences out of the thousands of remarks that the president makes and trying to make it look like that's the entire focus of his administration
so
is a little
I'm
bit
at a point where we're getting close to having the cabinet and other things I want. There will always be change. I think you want to see change.
Yeah, and he just nominated two new people to be part of his cabinet. So we are getting close. We'd like those 2 individuals to be quickly confirmed, quickly put through that process so that they can take a seat at the table, so that they can continue to engage with the president on big issues that actually matter to the American people.
But immediately,
Sorry, I'm going to keep moving here.
Initially, you said he had the best people, so that's my question.
I'm going to keep moving.
It's been a week since the U.S. accepted the North Koreans' offer for a meeting. Can you give us any update? Has the U.S. had any direct or indirect contact with the North Koreans, or are you still relying right now on this offer from the South Korean delegation?
I'm not going to go into details on the internal U.S. government preparations, but I will say that this is a comprehensive approach in support of the president, and we're continuing to move forward with those conversations.
Anything on timing? I know there's been talk of
Still
May.
no updates on time or location. Dave?
Thanks, Sarah. The government said this week that we've reached a point now where the government has added $1 trillion to the debt since President Trump took office. Obviously, that's not the direction he promised to go in the campaign. And he really doesn't talk about deficits much anymore. Has he given up on cutting deficits? Is he still concerned about it? What can he do about it?
Of course he's still concerned. That's one of the reasons that the very first budget they put forward tried to address some of those concerns. We're continuing to look for ways that we can cut government. I think we've done that in a number of ways through the deregulation process, cutting out a lot of inefficiencies in government, and we're going to continue to do that and continue to push for policies that will help us reduce that.
Sarah.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. It's also been a week since the president announced that he will impose those stiff sanctions on imported steel and imported aluminum. And today the EU published a list of American products that would be targeted in retaliation